What do you call it when your wife dares you to file for divorce, smirks like she's already won, and then realizes too late that you don't argue, you document? Because the moment you sign the papers, her whole power turns into panic. My name is Adrian Cole, and I used to believe silence was a phase that passed when love returned. Lena taught me that silence could be a weapon, polished and practiced like it belonged on a wall. She could turn a room into an icebox without raising her voice, and she enjoyed the control. For weeks, she had been busy, tired, and not in the mood, which was her way of saying I should beg. I did not beg, because begging is just agreeing you deserve the leash. I still tried, though, in the dumb ways decent husbands try, with coffee left by her mug, dishes done before she noticed, and small questions offered like peace flags. She answered those flags with the same empty stare, as if words were expensive and I had not earned them. In the beginning, I told myself it was stress, or hormones, or a bad month. Eventually, you run out of gentle explanations and start hearing the click of a lock. It did not start with her ex, at least not openly, because Lena liked to warm the room before she burned it. It started with her phone, always face down, always close enough to touch, always out of reach for me. It started with her laughter arriving late at night, soft and private, like it came from a different life. It started with her leaving the apartment with an outfit that looked planned, then returning with the same outfit that looked survived. She began calling everything a misunderstanding, which is what people say when they do not intend to explain. I noticed the pattern because patterns are the only honest thing humans leave behind. You do not need secret cameras or hacked accounts when somebody is sloppy with time. All you need is a calendar, a memory, and a spine. One Tuesday, she announced she was meeting an old friend, and she said it while staring at her reflection. She did not say it to me, not really, because she had already said it to herself. I asked where they were meeting, and she shrugged like the question was childish. I asked what time she would be back, and she said she did not know, which meant she did know. I asked if I knew the friend, and she smiled without warmth and said that I was being controlling. That word landed in the room like a glass hitting tile, sharp, loud, and meant to cut. I watched her leave, and I watched the door close, and I realized I was alone in my own home again. When you are married to a person who enjoys making you feel replaceable, you start to wonder what exactly you are paying for. Her return was later than her promise, because she had not promised anything. She walked in with that clean, practiced calm that people wear when they want to look innocent. She placed her keys down carefully, as if noise might invite questions. She did not kiss me, and she did not ask about my day, and she did not even pretend. I asked evenly how the old friend was doing, and her eyes narrowed with irritation, like I had interrupted her victory lap. She told me I was paranoid, and then she told me I was exhausting, and then she told me I should trust her. Trust, from Lena, was always a one-way street with tolls. If I trusted her, I had to shut up. If I did not trust her, I had to apologize. Either way, she won. Over the next week, she doubled down on the same routine, which is how you can tell it is not an accident. Her phone lit up at odd hours, and she would angle the screen away, not quickly, but casually, as if it were normal. She started taking calls in the bathroom with the fan on, which is the oldest trick in the book. She began leaving the apartment for errands, with lipstick that looked freshly applied, then returning without a single bag. I stopped asking questions that invited arguments, and started asking questions that invited facts. Facts were what she could not tolerate, because facts do not flinch when you glare at them. Lena could win any emotional game, but she had no patience for a ledger. The name came to me the way a bad song sticks, unwanted but persistent. Grant. I had heard it once, months ago, when she mentioned an ex in a story that sounded rehearsed. Grant was the kind of man she described as complicated, which usually means careless and charming. She had told me that chapter was over, and she had said it with a sweet voice meant to soothe. I had believed her because I wanted peace more than proof. That is what marriage does if you let it, because you trade skepticism for comfort, and then act surprised when comfort becomes blindness. The first time I saw his name on her lock screen, it was not even dramatic. Her phone lit up on the counter while she rinsed a cup, and there it was, plain and bold, like it belonged. I did not touch the device, and I did not do anything stupid, because stupid gives people excuses. I only read what was offered to my eyes, and I stored it like a note in a file. The next day, I brought it up carefully, because I still hoped there was a version of this that ended quietly. I said I noticed Grant's name, and I asked why he was texting her again. Lena looked at me like I had just tracked mud into a clean room. She said Grant was nothing, and then she said he was just checking in, and then she said I was making drama. Her answers came too fast, stacked like defensive paperwork. She told me she could talk to whoever she wanted, and she said it like a dare. Then she leaned back, and the smirk appeared, slow and deliberate, like she was enjoying a scene. Her next words were not a defense, but a challenge, and she delivered them with the confidence of someone who thought I would fold. If you do not like me talking to my ex, then file for divorce. She let the sentence hang there, heavy with implication, and she waited for my reaction. Lena expected pleading, bargaining, maybe a little anger that she could twist into proof that I was unstable. She expected me to blink, apologize, and accept the new rules. That was the part of me she had trained, the part that used to say, "Let's not make this bigger," while she made it bigger anyway. I looked at her and saw something I had not let myself name before. This was not a misunderstanding, and it was not a rough patch. It was a power play, and my marriage had become her favorite stage. I understood in that moment that she wanted me to fight for her while she shopped around for someone else. She wanted security and excitement, loyalty and rebellion, a husband and a backup plan. She did not want consequences, and she believed I was incapable of giving her any. I did not raise my voice, because shouting is what people do when they feel small. I asked her if she meant it, and her smirk widened like a door opening. She repeated herself, slower this time, as if explaining a lesson to a stubborn student. I noticed how comfortable she was with the idea, how easy it was for her to threaten the foundation of our life. I noticed the way she watched my face, hunting for fear. I felt something settle inside me, not anger, not sadness, but clarity. Clarity is not warm, and it is not dramatic. Clarity is a cold room where lies have nowhere to hide. I told her that I heard her, and I said it in the same tone I would use with a coworker confirming a meeting time. That seemed to confuse her, because it gave her nothing to feed on. She rolled her eyes and walked away, satisfied, as if she had just won a round. She moved through the apartment like a queen in a conquered country. She made herself tea, turned on a show, and acted like the conversation had ended. In her mind, she had placed the divorce word on the table as a threat, not as a door. She did not understand that some men do not respond to threats with panic. Some men respond with planning. That night, while she slept, I did not scroll through her phone because I do not need stolen crumbs to justify a meal. I sat at the kitchen table with my own device, my own accounts, and my own calm. I looked up the basics of filing, not for drama, but for structure. I bookmarked forms, and I read timelines, and I made notes in plain language. I wrote down dates when she started the silent treatment, and I wrote down the day she dared me. I did not do it because I wanted revenge, not yet. I did it because I wanted the truth to have a spine, and spines are built one vertebra at a time. I also wrote down what mattered most if this went ugly, because Lena was the type to rewrite history when it suited her. I needed a record that did not depend on emotion. The next morning, she was sweet, which was the first red flag. She poured coffee as if we were normal, and she touched my arm like she was reminding me who owned the temperature in the room. Lena did not change moods because she felt love. She changed moods because she felt advantage. She asked if I was over it, and she smiled like she was offering mercy. I said I was thinking, and she tilted her head with the patience of a person watching a trapped animal. She made a small joke about me calming down. Then she kissed my cheek, and she walked out the door. She left with that same careful confidence, because she believed she had trained me to accept anything as long as she occasionally offered sugar. I went to work and kept my face neutral, because I know how rumors grow. In the middle of the afternoon, a message popped up on my phone from our shared bank, a notification about a charge on a joint card. It was not huge, but it was unusual. It was a restaurant I did not recognize, paid for at a time she told me she would be at the gym. My pulse did not spike, because I had already crossed the bridge where denial lives. I saved the notification like a receipt, because that is what it was. One small proof, household level and lawful, dropped into my lap without any effort. Lena had always been so focused on controlling the story that she forgot to control the paper trail. When she came home, she was energetic, almost glowing, and she did not notice how carefully I watched her. She talked about her day in vague blocks, full of harmless details meant to distract. She mentioned a friend she had not named, an errand that had no result, a place she had been that left no trace. I listened, and I nodded, and I asked questions that sounded casual. She answered them smoothly, and she seemed proud of herself. For a moment, I understood her mindset with painful clarity. She did not see herself as betraying me. She saw herself as managing me. She saw the marriage as a structure that existed to hold her life, not a bond that required mutual respect. And she believed her smirk could replace accountability forever. After dinner, she sat on the couch and scrolled, and I sat across the room and felt the distance between us like a measurement. She glanced up and asked lightly if I was still thinking about that silly divorce thing. She said it like the word was a toy she could take away anytime she wanted. I kept my voice flat and told her I had heard her clearly. Her smile returned, sharp at the edges, and she asked if I was going to do it, as if daring me again. She was expecting a joke, an apology, or a sulk. What she got was my silence, calm and intentional, the kind of silence she could not control. I went to the bedroom and closed the door, and I did not slam it, because slamming is performance. I sat at my desk and opened the bookmarked pages again, reading them with the same focus I would give to a contract. I printed the first set of forms on the small printer that Lena never noticed, because she only noticed things that fed her ego. I placed the papers in a plain folder, and I wrote a date on the tab in black ink. I did not feel triumphant, and I did not feel destroyed. I felt awake. Lena thought divorce was a threat. I was starting to treat it like a plan. In the living room, I heard her laugh at something on her screen, quiet and private again, like a promise made to someone else. I did not confront her, because confrontation would only give her a stage. Instead, I looked at the folder, then at the calendar on my wall, then at the clock. I realized that the real battle was not about Grant, or even about cheating. The real battle was about whether I would continue to accept a marriage where my dignity was a bargaining chip. Lena had already told me the rules of her game. Now it was my turn to decide whether I would keep playing. And as I slid the folder into my drawer, I knew exactly what would happen when she finally realized I meant it. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm because my brain had decided sleep was a luxury item. Lena was beside me, warm and relaxed, like she had done nothing but exist peacefully. That contrast used to confuse me, and now it only confirmed my suspicion that she treated emotions like costumes. I watched her breathe, slow and steady, and I wondered how long she had been practicing this version of innocence. When she finally opened her eyes, she did not look guilty, because guilt requires a belief system. She stretched, checked her phone without turning it toward me, and offered a casual smile that felt like a tip tossed to a waiter. I matched her energy the way you match a stranger's handshake, firm and empty. She asked if I was still in a mood, and she said it like my feelings were a temporary illness. I told her I had a lot to think about, and I kept my voice level enough to be boring. Boring is the enemy of manipulators, because boredom means you are not reacting. She rolled her eyes and wandered into the kitchen, humming like a person without consequences. I listened to the cabinets open and close, and I watched the clock, and I felt the quiet certainty growing heavier inside me. She dressed with care, not for comfort, but for attention. There was a difference, and I had been ignoring it like a man ignoring smoke because he likes the warmth. She put on perfume that lingered in the hallway after she left, and she carried her phone like a passport. She said she had a busy day, and she did not define busy because definition invites verification. I asked what time she would be home, and she gave me a vague range that could cover anything. Then she smiled again, the same soft cruelty, and asked if I was going to file those papers she had joked about. I told her I believed in taking people at their word. The sentence was neutral, but the meaning was not. She paused for a fraction of a second, like a machine waiting for a command, and then she laughed. She kissed my cheek in a way that felt rehearsed, grabbed her bag, and walked out. The door clicked shut, and I stood there looking at the empty hallway like it had just delivered a verdict. I did not chase her, because chasing is what she wanted. Instead, I cleaned the kitchen slowly, not because it needed cleaning, but because routine keeps you from making stupid decisions. While I wiped the counter, my phone buzzed again with another bank alert. The notification was simple, the kind most people swipe away without thinking, but the merchant name and time were loud in their own language. It was a coffee place near downtown, paid for at a time she claimed she would be in a team meeting. I stared at the screen until the meaning settled, and then I saved it, not with anger, but with method. I made a folder on my phone called Receipts, because subtlety was no longer necessary inside my own head. I took a screenshot of the alert and added a note with the date and the time. Then I opened our shared calendar and scrolled through the week view, because calendars do not care about charm. Her schedule was full of vague blocks that looked official, but official is just a word when you control the writing. I exported the week view as a PDF and saved it alongside the alert, because patterns are easier to prove when they are printed. I did not need to look at her phone to build the outline of her lies. All I needed was her carelessness with time and money, and she had plenty of both. By lunchtime, my plan was not revenge exactly, but containment. I was done trying to win her affection, and I was done trying to convince her to respect me. The only question left was how clean I could make the exit and how little room I would leave for her to rewrite the story. Lena loved narratives, and she loved them even more when they made her the hero. If I walked away quietly, she would tell people I was cold, controlling, unstable, or some other convenient label. If I walked away loudly, she would tell people I was abusive, dramatic, or dangerous. The only safe place between those two lies was documented truth, neatly filed and calmly delivered. In the afternoon, I went to a print shop under the excuse of picking up a work document. I printed the calendar PDF and the bank alerts, and I asked for a simple receipt because I wanted the timestamp. The clerk handed me the paper without caring what my life looked like, because strangers rarely care until your pain becomes entertainment. I walked back to my car and placed the papers in a clear sleeve I had bought months ago for household documents. I wrote the date on the sleeve label and slid it into the folder at home, because I was building a record that could survive her charisma. When Lena came home that evening, she acted like nothing had changed. She talked about traffic, meetings, and errands, which were her favorite fog machines. She was oddly cheerful, the kind of cheerful that usually comes after a secret victory. She set her bag down and went straight to the bathroom, locking the door like privacy was an achievement. I heard her phone buzz behind that door, and I heard her laugh softly, and I felt the last remaining tenderness in me pull back like a hand from a hot pan. She came out and asked what I wanted for dinner, as if dinner could fix contempt. I told her I could handle my own food, and I watched her eyes flicker with irritation. She was used to me smoothing everything over, and my neutrality confused her. Confusion is dangerous for people who live by control, because control requires predictability. She tried a different tactic, leaning into the doorway with a smile and asking if I was upset. I told her I was paying attention. That answer made her pause again, and then she shrugged like it did not matter. She walked into the kitchen and started talking louder, performing normalcy for an audience of one. Later that night, she curled up on the couch with her phone and scrolled like a teenager hiding a diary. I sat at the table with my folder open, not in front of her, but close enough to remind myself it existed. I added a new page to my ledger, handwritten and plain. Date, time, merchant, calendar block, and the cover story she had used. It looked clinical, and maybe it was, but I had spent too long living in feelings that could be dismissed. Facts, at least, could not be gaslit. Around 10, her phone lit up again, and I caught the lock screen glance without moving my head. I saw the name, and I saw the little preview line beneath it, and I saw enough to know it was not a check-in. She snatched the phone quickly, and the movement was too sharp for someone with nothing to hide. She looked over at me and lifted her chin, daring me to say something. I did not. I let her sit with the silence, the kind she used to punish me with, and I watched her discomfort grow. It was the first time in months that silence belonged to me. The next day, I changed the rhythm. I did not ask where she was going. I did not ask why she was late. I did not ask anything that could be framed as control. I simply listened and collected. Lena started escalating, because when a manipulator loses leverage, they reach for bigger levers. She criticized small things, like the way I loaded the dishwasher or the way I folded towels, as if I had suddenly become incompetent. She teased me about being sensitive, then acted offended when I did not smile. She made small digs about money, about ambition, about my need for stability, as if she were auditioning for a new role. I recognized the pattern immediately, because it was not random. She was trying to provoke me into being the villain in her story. In the afternoon, I got another alert from the bank, and this one was not coffee. It was a dinner reservation deposit at a restaurant with the kind of lighting people use for apologies and affairs. The time was set for the next evening, and the reservation was for 2. Lena had told me we might do something that weekend, but she had not mentioned any reservation. I stared at the alert and felt the thin line between pain and clarity snap cleanly. She was not just talking to her ex. She was planning around me, spending around me, and smiling at me like I was a piece of furniture she owned. That night I did something new, and it was completely legal. I opened our shared calendar on my own device and searched the week for the block she claimed was a work dinner. It was there, vague and polished, sitting right on top of the restaurant time. I took a screenshot of the calendar conflict header and saved it beside the reservation alert. Then I printed both pages and stapled them together, because paper has a way of making people honest. I placed the stapled pages into the sleeve and slid the sleeve into the folder with the other evidence. It felt simple, and it felt final. When Lena came home, she brought a strange energy with her, tense and excited at the same time. She mentioned casually that she might be out late the next evening. She called it a catch-up, and she said it without looking at my face. I nodded once, like I was hearing about the weather. She asked if I was going to be weird about it, and she said it like she hoped I would be. I told her she could make her own choices. She stared at me, trying to read the trap I was building, but she only saw calm. Calm is what people fear when they know they are guilty, because calm usually means preparation. After she went to bed, I sat at the table and opened the divorce forms again. I filled in the sections I could, slowly and carefully, because mistakes are invitations. I did not file yet, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the timing to be perfect. Lena's power came from believing she could threaten me without consequence. If I filed too early, she would frame it as impulsive. If I filed after one more clean piece of evidence, she would have less room to twist the narrative. I was not playing to hurt her. I was playing to end her control in a way she could not undo. I slid the completed pages into a separate folder and labeled it Filed, even though it was not filed yet. The label was a promise to myself, and I needed that promise more than I needed comfort. In the living room, her phone buzzed again, and she laughed in her sleep, a quiet sound that made my stomach tighten. I looked at the calendar conflict screenshot on the table, then at the stapled pages, then at the blank space where my wedding ring had started to feel like a shackle. I realized something else, sharper than the rest. Lena did not believe I would leave because she thought I needed her more than I needed dignity. She thought my love was a weakness she could monetize. She thought the word divorce was a toy she could throw at me when she wanted me to flinch. She had no idea that my patience had already died, and that what remained was a man who could finally say no without shaking. The next evening, she would walk out the door with that same confident smirk, and she would assume she had won again. She had no idea that I already had the paper trail, the timeline, and the moment picked out. And she definitely did not know who I had decided to speak to first. My name is Ethan Cole, and I learned the hard way that silence can be a weapon. I used to think love meant enduring whatever mood she served me, but Lena turned endurance into a leash. The month of silent treatment had not been quiet, because quiet has peace in it. Her silence was a daily sentence, delivered without evidence, and I spent that month trying to earn parole. When she finally smirked and said I had learned my lesson, I understood what the lesson actually was. She believed my dignity was negotiable, and she thought she owned the price. So when I told myself I had decided who to speak to first, it was not a dramatic vow. It was a practical decision, the kind you make after you accept reality. I was not going to speak to Lena first because speaking to her was like throwing words into a blender. I was going to speak to someone who dealt in paperwork, timelines, and outcomes. Someone who would not be impressed by her smile, or her tears, or her sudden performance of innocence. Someone whose job existed because people like Lena never stop rewriting history. I drove to a small office on the edge of downtown where a family mediator named Grace Harlow ran a calm business. The building looked like it had never hosted a crisis, which was probably the point. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet, and it had the kind of quiet that made you lower your voice by instinct. I sat in my car for a minute and watched people pass on the sidewalk, carrying groceries, coffee, and the luxury of uncomplicated days. Then I took my folder, checked that the sleeves were sealed, and walked in like a man delivering evidence to court. Grace greeted me with a polite, tired kindness that did not ask for drama. She took my name, asked me to sit, and offered water in a paper cup that tasted like nothing. I told her I wanted to understand my options for divorce without making my life a public circus. I also told her I wanted a plan that limited damage to me, not because I was fragile, but because I knew how aggressively some people lied when cornered. Grace listened without interrupting, and she took notes like my words were data, not entertainment. I handed her the sleeve you could call my starter kit, which included the printed calendar week view and the alerts showing the charges. I did not frame it as proof of cheating, because accusing someone is different from proving a pattern. I framed it as proof of deception, because deception is the engine that keeps a bad marriage running. Grace studied the pages, then asked a few questions that were simple but sharp. She wanted to know how long the threats had been happening, how finances were structured, whether there were children, and whether I felt physically unsafe. I told her the truth, which was that I did not feel unsafe in a violent way. I felt unsafe in the way you feel when someone can destroy your reputation with a sentence. Grace did not gasp, and she did not offer sympathy in a way that felt like pity. She explained what a clean filing looked like, what temporary agreements could cover, and how the timeline mattered more than my anger. She also warned me that divorce does not reveal someone's character, it just removes the costumes that marriage makes convenient. That line landed heavier than I expected, because I realized Lena had been rehearsing for this exit for a long time. Her threats were not jokes. They were training sessions for how she planned to control the narrative when I finally stopped obeying. I left Grace's office with two things: clarity and a list. The list was not instructions for revenge, because I was not interested in anything illegal or theatrical. It was a list of practical steps that protected me from financial games and emotional traps. I drove home and parked in the same spot as always, because routine is camouflage. When I walked inside, Lena was in the kitchen, leaning on the counter and scrolling her phone like it was more interesting than the room we shared. She glanced at me, then looked away, because looking away was her favorite move. She wanted to teach me that attention was currency, remembered only when she felt generous. She asked where I had been, and her tone was casual in a way that pretended she had authority. I told her I had errands, and I kept my answer boring. She smiled and said it was nice that I finally had a life. She was trying to poke me into defending myself because defense is a doorway. If you step through that doorway, the argument becomes about your tone, your sensitivity, your flaws. I refused to enter. I said nothing, washed my hands, and walked past her like she was a person with no power over me. That night, she dressed too carefully for someone staying home. She tried to act normal, but her normal had changed, and I could see it in the details. She wore earrings she only wore when she expected attention. She put on lipstick, then wiped it off, then put it on again, which was the nervous habit of a person preparing for a performance. When she told me she might meet her ex for coffee because they were just talking, she said it with a smirk that dared me to object. I asked what time she would be back, and she gave me the same soft range that could cover any lie. Then she added the line she loved, the line that made her feel fearless. She said if I did not like it, I could file for divorce. I looked at her and felt something inside me turn calm in a way that frightened even me. Her threat had once been a guillotine hanging over my neck. Now it sounded like a recommendation from someone who thought I was too weak to act. I told her I appreciated honesty, and I told her I believed in taking people at their word. Lena blinked twice because she was trying to decide whether I was mocking her. Then she laughed and walked out as if she had won another round. The moment the door shut, my phone buzzed with another notification. It was a charge from a rideshare placed on my account, and the pickup location was nowhere near the story she had told me. I did not celebrate, because this was not a victory, it was confirmation. I saved the alert, screenshot it, and wrote the time in my ledger. Then I opened the shared calendar again and looked for the block she had used to cover the lie. There it was, neat and vague, sitting on top of reality like a sticker on a cracked window. I exported the week view again and saved it, because repeating patterns are easier to prove than a single incident. I slept lightly, because my mind had turned into an accountant. The next morning, Lena came home smelling like she had tried to wash the night off her skin. She acted irritated, not guilty, because irritation was her default shield. She said the conversation with her ex had been long and emotional and complicated, which were words designed to discourage follow-up. She also said I was lucky she was even being transparent. I heard that last part clearly. In her mind, transparency was a favor she granted when it suited her, not a basic requirement in a marriage. I nodded, made coffee, and let her talk into the air. When she asked why I was so quiet, I told her I was thinking about what she said. She smirked, thinking I meant I was thinking about how to comply. She did not understand that I was thinking about how to leave. She also did not understand that my calm was not acceptance. My calm was preparation. Over the next week, Lena started pulling harder on the ropes because she sensed the leash slipping. She tried affection as bait, brushing her hand over my shoulder, offering a quick kiss, asking whether I wanted to start fresh. Then, when I did not melt, she switched to contempt, criticizing my work, my habits, my need for stability. It was the same pattern again and again, like she had only two playlists. Either I was a child she could scold, or I was a dog she could lure with treats. The pressure did not only come from her, it came from our shared world. Mutual friends texted to ask if everything was okay because Lena had started leaking half-truths like smoke. She did not say she was cheating, of course. She said I was distant, stressed, and controlling because those words were socially useful. I could feel the neighborhood mood shifting, small and subtle, like people were waiting to see who would be cast as the villain. That was exactly what I wanted to prevent, because public perception becomes a courtroom long before any official paperwork exists. So I did the unglamorous work. I collected my own facts, quietly, without spying, without tricks, and without crossing lines I would regret. I saved every bank alert connected to her errands. I printed the shared calendar views that contradicted her cover stories. I stapled documents in chronological order, labeled sleeves with dates, and built a ledger that could withstand her emotional weather. Every entry was simple: date, time, location, cover story, and proof. It looked cold, but cold was what you needed when someone tried to burn you with feelings. One evening she demanded my phone, claiming she wanted transparency. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. I told her no, and I said it calmly, which made her angry. She called me secretive and accused me of hiding something. I told her she had threatened divorce over talking to her ex, and I had taken that statement seriously. She laughed, then snapped that I would never actually do it. She said I did not have the spine. She said I was dependent. She said she could do whatever she wanted because I always stayed. That was when I realized the truth was not only about her ex. Her ex was the visible symptom, the easiest excuse, the most convenient villain. The real betrayal was her certainty that my boundaries were fake. The real affair was the one she was having with power, the one where she kissed control every day and came home expecting me to applaud. And once I saw that, my decision became cleaner. I was not leaving because she talked to her ex. I was leaving because she needed me to be small. 2 days later, Grace emailed me a draft schedule for an initial mediation session, and the date was close enough to taste. I printed the email with the header visible because headers tell their own story. I placed it in my folder and locked the folder in a drawer, not because Lena could not find it, but because the act of locking it reminded me the plan was real. I also moved my personal documents into a separate envelope and put it somewhere safe, because divorce turns simple items into bargaining chips if you let it. That night, Lena announced she was going to a late meeting, and she said it like she expected me to beg. I told her to have a good night, and I meant it in the way you wish a thief safe driving. She stared at me, searching for anger, tears, anything she could feed on. When she found nothing, she looked unsettled. Then she smiled again, that familiar smirk, and walked out with a confidence that was about to become very expensive. I waited 10 minutes, then opened my phone and checked the folder one more time. I had the rideshare receipt, the bank alerts, the calendar conflicts, and the mediation email. I had enough to prove a pattern of deception within a tight window, and that was all I needed to justify the next step. Then my phone buzzed again, and this notification was different. It was a merchant alert from a hotel lobby bar, charged to my account, with a timestamp that matched the late meeting window perfectly. I stared at the screen, saved the alert, and felt my pulse settle into something steady and dangerous. Because now it was not just proof that she lied. Now it was proof that she had grown careless. And careless people make mistakes right before they get caught. The hotel lobby bar alert sat on my screen like a bruise that would not fade, and the strangest part was how ordinary it looked. It was not a confession, and it was not a photograph, and it did not shout the way betrayal is supposed to shout. It was a line of text with a merchant name, a timestamp, and an amount small enough to be insulting. Lena's favorite trick had always been to make everything sound small, because small things feel harmless until they become a pattern. She had been training me to ignore patterns for years, and now she was careless enough to pay for her lies with my own account. I did not call her, and I did not pace the house like a man auditioning for heartbreak. I saved the alert, wrote the exact time in my ledger, and took a photo of the screen beside the kitchen clock. The clock mattered because clocks do not care about excuses, and Lena's whole life had been built on excuses. I printed the statement page that showed the alert later that night because paper has a way of humiliating people who rely on charm. Then I locked the folder away again, not because I feared her, but because I refused to let my evidence become her toy. I slept in fragments because my brain kept replaying the month of silence in reverse. Each day of her silent treatment had been a test, and I had been failing those tests by trying harder. The tests were never about fixing anything, because she did not want a fix. The tests were about obedience, and her smirk was the stamp of approval she gave herself when she felt me bend. The memory of her saying I had learned my lesson came back in sharper detail, and I realized she had been smiling at my pain the same way a gambler smiles at a rigged table. In the morning, Lena walked in wearing the same calm mask she used after a night of pretending nothing happened. Her hair was a little too neat for someone who claimed she had been stuck in meetings. Her eyes were bright in a way that suggested she had been energized, not drained. She kissed the air near my cheek like I was furniture she had decided to dust, then asked whether I had slept okay. Her voice was soft, but the softness felt like a hook. I said I slept fine, because I was done handing her emotional handles. She asked if I wanted breakfast, and I said I had work. She sighed the way people sigh when they think they are the victim of someone else's bad attitude. Then she mentioned her ex again, casually, like she was naming a brand of cereal. She said he had been going through things, and she had been helping, and she did not want drama at home. The point was not the words. The point was the framing, because she was always the helper, and I was always the problem. I nodded, watched her face, and noticed the micro-expression she could never fully control. It was not guilt, because guilt requires a conscience, and she treated conscience like a luxury item. It was caution, the kind that appears when a liar senses a change in weather. She was not sure what I knew, and she was trying to measure me without asking direct questions. Lena did not fear the truth itself. She feared losing control of how the truth was told. On my drive to work, I made one decision, and it felt like swallowing steel. I was not going to win this by yelling, and I was not going to win it by begging. I was going to win it by refusing to participate in her theater and by keeping my actions boring. Boring was my camouflage, and it was also my revenge. People like Lena rely on chaos, because chaos blurs details. I was going to build a record so clean that chaos could not touch it. At my office, I moved through the day like nothing had changed, but I watched how people looked at me. You can feel rumors before you hear them, because people hesitate around you. A coworker asked if I was okay, then pretended it was about my workload. Another one made a joke about marriage politics, and laughed too hard like he wanted to show he was harmless. I did not take the bait, because defending yourself against whispers makes the whispers sound truer. Lena's half-truths were spreading, and I could tell she was feeding them in careful doses. Around lunch, my phone buzzed again with another charge, and it was not even subtle. It was a second bar tab, a different amount, and a slightly later time. The location matched the same hotel name, and that mattered more than the money. One tab could be a fluke in the hands of an honest person. 2 tabs in the same place, in the same time window, starts looking like a habit. I saved the alert again, screenshot it, and added it to my ledger with a note that the charges were consecutive. Then I turned my phone face down and kept eating like a man who had already chosen his outcome. After work, I stopped by a print shop near my building and printed the bank notifications on plain paper. I also printed the shared calendar week view again, because I wanted the cover story to sit beside the proof, like two faces on a wanted poster. The calendar had a vague block labeled with something like committee prep, and it overlapped perfectly with the timestamps of the hotel charges. Lena was not even inventing creative lies. She was using vague productivity words, because vague words are hard to disprove in conversation. Paper does not argue. Paper just sits there and lets the liar get tired. At home, Lena was suddenly affectionate, and it felt rehearsed. She asked about my day and actually listened, which was how I knew she was acting. She offered to order dinner, and she made sure to say she would pay, which was rich given the hotel tabs sitting in my folder. She said she had been thinking about us, and she wanted to reset, and she did not like how tense things felt. Then she added the poison, softly, because she always did. She said she did not want to feel controlled, and she needed space, and she would not stop talking to her ex just because I was insecure. I looked at her and noticed something else. She did not say she loved him, and she did not say she loved me. She said she would not stop doing what she wanted. That was not romance. That was governance. She wanted a marriage where she ruled and I funded the kingdom. The smirk appeared when she saw I was still silent, because she mistook my silence for surrender. I let her make that mistake, because mistakes are expensive later. That night, while she showered, her phone lit up on the counter with a lock screen preview. I did not need to touch it, and I did not need to cross any lines. The preview gave me enough, because it showed a name I recognized and a sentence that referenced last night like it was a shared secret. The message was casual, familiar, and confident. This was not an ex checking in on a friend. This was an ex who believed he had access, and he was acting like it. I did not read further, and I did not open anything. I simply took a photo of the lock screen preview from where I stood, with the time visible, because the time was the part that mattered. When Lena came out, she was wrapped in a towel in confidence, and she asked why I looked distant again. I told her I was tired, because tired is a safe word that does not invite debate. She smiled and said she could tell I was learning, and the smugness in her voice made my jaw tighten. She believed my calm was the result of her training. She did not know it was the result of my planning. Then she did something that showed how deeply she underestimated me. She told me lightly that if I really could not handle her talking to her ex, I should do what I always threatened and file for divorce. I almost laughed, because it was not even a threat anymore. It was a dare from someone standing on a trapdoor, proud of the sound it made. I nodded like I was considering it, and I went to bed without touching her. Lena tried to make that about her desirability, because she needed the world to revolve around her. She did not understand that my distance had nothing to do with desire. It had everything to do with refusing to be an accomplice in my own humiliation. The next day, I met Grace again in her office, and I brought the updated ledger. I placed the folder on her desk and watched her eyes move across the timestamps like she was reading a weather report. She asked if I had confronted Lena, and I said no. Grace nodded like she approved, because she knew confrontation without structure turns into noise. She told me my evidence was trending toward a clear pattern of financial misuse and deception, even if it never became a courtroom accusation. She also warned me that once I filed, Lena would likely escalate her narrative and try to make me look unstable. Grace's tone was calm, but her message was not. She was telling me the next phase would be uglier because it would involve other people. We discussed timelines, civil steps, and what immediate boundaries would protect me financially. We also discussed communication, because one wrong text sent in anger can become a weapon in the hands of someone who loves stories. Grace suggested I keep communication minimal and neutral, and I could almost hear Lena mocking the idea. Neutrality is what she hated most, because neutrality gives her nothing to fight. I left with a date for filing preparation and a list of documents to gather, and I felt the strange relief of a man who has finally chosen a direction. When I got home, Lena was on the couch with her phone, laughing at something I could not hear. She looked up and her eyes narrowed, not from curiosity, but from suspicion. She asked where I had been, and the question was too sharp to be casual. I told her I had appointments, and I kept my voice flat. She pressed for details, and I said it was personal. Her face changed immediately because she hated being denied access. She was the kind of person who called privacy secrecy when she was not the one holding the keys. She stood, walked closer, and tried to reclaim the old power by turning the room into a courtroom. She accused me of hiding something and asked if I was cheating. The accusation was almost funny because it revealed her real fear. She was not worried I had someone else. She was worried I had a plan she did not control. I told her I was not cheating, and I did not raise my voice. I told her I was taking care of myself, and I watched her flinch as if the words were a slap. Then she did what she always did when control slipped. She switched to tears, sudden and theatrical, and said she felt unsafe around my coldness. She said I was punishing her. She said I was emotionally abusive. The words fell out too smoothly, like she had practiced them. I did not argue, and I did not comfort her, because both responses would feed the script. I simply said I was not interested in fighting, and I walked to the kitchen to pour water. Lena followed me, still crying, and told me she would never forgive me if I filed for divorce. She said I would regret it, and she said no one would believe me anyway. She leaned into the threat at the end, because that was her true language. She was telling me that the social world mattered more than the truth, and she had been building a version of events that made her the victim. I looked at her and realized she was not begging for the marriage. She was begging for the stage. I set the glass down and met her eyes for a long moment, because she needed to feel the shift. I did not tell her I had evidence, because I did not want to teach her how to hide it. I did not tell her I had met Grace, because I did not want her rehearsing a defense. I simply said her ex could keep her company, because I was done competing with ghosts and games. Her tears stopped instantly, and her mouth tightened into that familiar smirk, like she had found her footing again. She leaned closer and said, slow and confident, that if I did not like her talking to her ex, then I should file for divorce. She said it like she was handing me a loaded gun she believed I was too afraid to hold. I watched her face, felt my heartbeat steady, and realized she still thought this was a bluff. I smiled, because it was the only honest thing I had left to show her, and I said I would do exactly that. Then I walked past her toward my desk drawer, because the envelope with the printed draft filing steps was waiting, and I could almost hear the moment her smirk would finally realize it had bet on the wrong man. The filing did not feel dramatic, and that was the point. I walked into the building with a folder that weighed less than a paperback, and I walked out with a stamped receipt that made the marriage officially mortal. The air outside tasted the same as it always did, but my chest felt different, like someone finally loosened a belt I had been wearing too long. I did not celebrate, because celebration would have meant the relationship still had power over me, and I was done donating my nervous system to her moods. Lena called me before I reached the car, which told me she had been tracking the moment emotionally, not digitally. Her timing was too perfect, and her voice was too polished, as if she had been warming it up for hours. She asked where I was, then corrected herself, and asked why I was doing this to her. I said I was not doing anything to her, because the truth was the simplest weapon I had. I told her I was doing something for myself, and the silence on the line turned sharp, because she did not recognize that language. She switched fast, because she always did. One second she was hurt, the next second she was amused, and then she was angry enough to sharpen every word into a small knife. She asked if I thought I was a hero now, and she asked if I had someone else, and she asked if I was trying to ruin her life. I said I was not trying to ruin anything, because trying implies effort, and I was choosing minimal effort on purpose. Then I told her she had dared me to file, and I had simply respected her confidence. That was the first time she sounded uncertain, because she expected a fight, and I gave her a mirror. When I got home, She was waiting in the living room, dressed like she was going to an event, not a confrontation. Her hair was styled, her makeup was precise, and her posture was relaxed in a way that begged for an audience. She looked at me like I was late to my own execution, and she asked what I had done today. I did not answer immediately, because speed is a gift you give to manipulators, and I was done being generous. I set my keys down, removed my coat slowly, and placed my phone on the counter as if it were just another object in the room. Lena watched the movements like she was reading a code, and her eyes kept flicking to my hands, because hands reveal intention. She tried the soft approach first, asking if we could talk like adults. Then she added the familiar insult under the softness, suggesting that I was being dramatic and that no one would take me seriously. It was the old routine, and I could almost predict her breath between sentences. I told her I had filed, and I said it like I was announcing a weather update. The words landed, and for a second, her face went blank. That blankness was not sadness. It was recalculation. It was the moment a person realizes their leverage has expired and they need a new currency. She blinked twice, then laughed in a short burst that sounded more like a cough than a joke. She asked me if I was serious, and I said yes. Then she asked if I thought I could just walk away and leave her with nothing, and I said I was walking away from a system where I was punished for having boundaries. Her eyes narrowed, and she began circling the room with restless energy, like she needed movement to keep control. She told me I was being cruel because she had only been talking to her ex. She said it was normal, and she said I was insecure, and she said I was throwing away years because of my ego. Then she changed lanes without signaling and claimed she had done everything for me, that she had carried the relationship. It was a history rewrite happening in real time, and I stood there letting her spend herself. I asked one question, and I kept my tone flat. I asked why her normal included hotel bar charges on my account. The way she froze told me I hit something solid. Her mouth opened as if she would dismiss it, but her eyes flared with the kind of panic that comes when a liar realizes the story is no longer abstract. She tried to recover by accusing me of spying, because that is the standard defense of someone who cannot address the evidence. I told her I did not spy. I told her my bank alerted me, because the account belonged to me, and the system did what systems do when you misuse them. She stepped closer, voice rising, and demanded to see what I had. I said no, because I did not owe her the blueprint of my exit. That refusal irritated her more than the filing, because refusal was my new habit, and she could not unlearn it. She told me she could explain everything, then immediately explained nothing. She suggested her card must have been saved somewhere, as if the machine had seduced itself. She said her ex had been paying, then said she had paid, and he would reimburse her, then said she had been meeting a friend, not him, and he only happened to be there. The contradictions piled up quickly, and I watched them stack like crooked blocks. She tried another angle, switching to tears again, and this time she aimed them directly at my guilt. She said she felt abandoned, and she said she had needed support, and she said the ex was the only one who listened. She framed it like a medical emergency, like she had been starving for oxygen and I had withheld it. I nodded once, because nodding is not agreement when you do it without words. Then I said something she did not expect. I said she could have asked for therapy or separation like an adult, but instead she used silence and threats, and now she was upset that the threat worked. The smirk appeared again, smaller, but still there, like a reflex she could not stop. She said I had learned my lesson once, and I would learn another one now. She said she would tell people what kind of man I really was. She said she would make sure everyone knew I was unstable, controlling, and vindictive. It was not a warning, it was a promise. She wanted fear to bring me back to the table, because fear had always been her most reliable tool. I looked at her and felt something settle in me, not rage, but clarity. The moment she threatened my reputation, she admitted the marriage had been a social project, not a partnership. I told her she was free to say whatever she wanted, but I was going to keep everything in writing from now on. I told her we would communicate through the proper channels, and I said it like I was scheduling an oil change. The calmness rattled her, because calmness makes threats look childish. Later that night, the first wave hit. My phone lit up with messages from people who never texted me without a reason. One was her cousin asking if everything was okay, which meant Lena had already chosen her first witnesses. Another was a friend of ours saying Lena was going through a hard time and asking if I could be gentle. The words were polite, but the shape of them was accusation. Lena was not trying to win me back. She was trying to win the narrative. I did not respond emotionally, because emotional responses become screenshots. I replied with short, neutral lines that could not be twisted into aggression. I said the divorce filing was real, and I said I hoped everyone would respect privacy. I did not mention her ex. I did not mention the bank alerts. I did not mention anything that could turn into gossip content. I was building a wall of boring facts, and I could feel her scraping at it from the other side. The next morning, she was suddenly cooperative, as if she had replaced her rage with strategy overnight. She asked if we could pause the filing and talk, and the phrase pause made me almost smile. A filing is not a streaming show you pause when the mood changes. She offered to cut off her ex, and she said it too quickly, like she was reading from a script she had written to survive consequences. Then she tried to bargain with intimacy, moving closer, softening her voice, suggesting we could reset if I stopped humiliating her. I told her the humiliation was her choice, not mine. I told her she had turned a boundary into a power game, and I had simply chosen to stop playing. She stared at me as if I had spoken in another language. For people like Lena, everything is a game, even apology. When she realized charm would not work, her face tightened, and she asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted a clean, civil process and a quiet end. I could see how much she hated the word quiet, because quiet meant no stage. That afternoon, I received a notice from my workplace to meet with HR the next day. The meeting subject line was vague, which is how organizations avoid responsibility. My stomach did not drop, but my mind sharpened, because the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Lena had always enjoyed applying pressure where I could not defend myself easily. If she wanted to punish me, she would do it in a place where politeness could be used against me. I printed the HR invite and placed it in my folder, because every escalation deserves a paper trail. I added one line to my evidence ledger, describing the timing and the context, not as proof of anything yet, but as a marker in the timeline. Then I sat at the kitchen table with the bank alerts, the calendar printouts, and the lock screen photo, and I arranged them in the simplest order possible: dates, places, payments, overlap. I did not decorate it with emotion. I did not need to. In the evening, Lena tried to ambush me with a family talk over dinner, as if food could turn conflict into diplomacy. She cooked my favorite meal, which felt less like kindness and more like a costume. She asked me to sit, and her voice was careful, almost respectful, which is always suspicious when it comes from someone who enjoys disrespect. She said she had spoken to her mother, and her mother was worried about me. She said her brother thought I was overreacting. She said everyone agreed that my actions were extreme. I chewed slowly and said nothing, because I could hear the trap being assembled. The goal was to isolate me by making me feel outnumbered. She wanted me to defend myself emotionally, because emotional defense looks like instability. I let her speak, then I set my fork down and asked a simple question. I asked whether she had told them about the hotel charges, the calendar overlap, and the lock screen message. The pause that followed was heavy enough to measure. She said none of that mattered, because it was out of context. She said it was private, and she said it was not their business. That was convenient, because she had already made me their business. She wanted privacy for her actions and publicity for my reaction. I nodded once, swallowed the last bite, and told her I would not discuss private evidence with her family, but I would not accept being judged on a story missing key facts. Then I stood up, cleared my plate, and walked away from the table like the meal had ended naturally. Behind me, I heard her chair scrape, and I heard her breath change, sharp and frustrated. She called my name, and the way she said it made it sound like a leash. I kept walking, because every step away from her performance was a step toward the end. In my room, I closed the door and looked at the folder again. I did not feel triumphant. I felt prepared. The next day's HR meeting was waiting, and I could already sense Lena's next move. I checked my phone one more time before sleep, and there was a new message from an unknown number. It was short, familiar in tone, and it referred to Lena as if she belonged to the sender. I did not respond. I saved the timestamp, took a screenshot, and added it to the ledger without commentary. Then I turned the phone off, because some nights, the only victory is denying them your attention. And I was starting to enjoy how powerless she became when my silence was no longer fear. The next morning had that fluorescent taste workplaces like to call neutral, and I could already feel it coating the inside of my skull before I reached the parking lot. I did not rush, because rushing is what guilty people do, and I was not guilty of anything except believing I could outweight Lena's need for control. My phone stayed in my pocket, powered off, because I did not need another message from a number that thought ownership could be typed in 10 characters. Inside the building, the air smelled like brewed coffee and quiet panic, and the hallways carried the same forced friendliness as always. People smiled too quickly, then looked away too slowly, and it took about 6 steps for me to understand that Lena's story had already arrived before I did. I caught fragments in the way heads angled, in the way conversations paused, and in the way one coworker pretended to be fascinated by the printer. If shame had an office uniform, it would be a lanyard and an innocent face. I kept my pace even, because tempo is part of posture. I walked past reception, nodded once, and went straight to my desk to do the only thing that matters in a storm: establish a clean timeline. I opened my notebook, wrote the date, wrote the time, and noted the subject line of the HR invite exactly as it appeared. Then I printed the invite again from my email, because redundancy beats regret, and I placed the paper in the folder beside the bank alerts and the screenshot from the unknown number. I was not building a revenge fantasy. I was building a record that could survive other people's emotions. By the time I reached the HR floor, I had already decided what my strategy would be. I would not argue. I would not defend myself with adjectives. I would not gift anyone a heated sentence they could frame as instability. I would answer questions with simple facts, and I would treat every word like it might end up on a screen. The HR lobby was quiet, decorated with soft chairs and softer lies about employee wellness. A receptionist looked up, then looked down, then looked back up as if my name had been preloaded into her day. She told me to wait, and the way she said it carried a hint of pity, which is the cheapest form of power. I sat, rested my hands on my knees, and watched the door like it owed me money. When the HR representative finally appeared, she wore the expression of someone who had practiced neutrality in a mirror. She did not introduce herself with warmth, because warmth creates expectations, and HR lives on the absence of them. She guided me into a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a single glass wall that made privacy feel like a joke. There was another person inside, someone from compliance, which meant this was not an informal check-in. This was a controlled conversation designed to produce a controlled outcome. They began with careful language about workplace conduct and concerns raised, and they mentioned the words hostile and unsafe without attaching them to any specific event. That was how you accuse someone without technically accusing them. I listened without interrupting, because interruptions are what they expect from the person they have been warned about. When they finally asked me to respond, I asked one question first. I asked whether any complaint had been filed in writing and whether I could see the exact wording. The HR representative exchanged a quick glance with the compliance person, and that glance contained more truth than her entire script. She said the concern was sensitive, and she said they were gathering information, and she said they needed to understand my current situation. I almost smiled at the phrase current situation, because it meant Lena had brought the divorce into my workplace like a live animal. I told them my current situation was a legal filing in civil court, and that I intended to keep it private. Then I asked again for the written complaint, because I was not there to discuss feelings, and I was not there to help someone rehearse allegations that could not survive paper. They did not hand me a document because there was no document they wanted me to see. Instead, they tried to steer the conversation toward my temperament, asking whether I had been under stress, whether I had support, and whether I had ever raised my voice at home. It was an interrogation disguised as concern, and it was obvious whose voice had taught them what questions to ask. Lena did not need to hack anything, because she could still weaponize the oldest technology in the world, a convincing story told to the right people. I told them I would not answer questions about my home that had no workplace relevance, and I said it calmly, without a tremor, without apology. I told them that if there were any specific workplace incident, I would address it directly, with dates and witnesses, and I would do so in writing. The compliance person shifted in their chair because writing is the enemy of improvisation. HR wants vibrations, not verifications. They want to be able to say they took action, not prove why they took it. The HR representative said they had a duty to ensure safety, and she asked whether I owned any weapons. The question was so out of place it almost sounded like parody, but her face stayed professional, because in her mind it was just another checkbox. I told her no, and I said it without offense, because offense is an emotion, and emotions are tools in the wrong hands. Then I asked her again to provide the written complaint, or at least to state the exact claim being investigated. This time she finally gave me something, but it was not a document. It was a summary, spoken aloud, sanitized and slippery, claiming that someone close to me had expressed fear about how I might react to being left. I did not need a map to find Lena's fingerprints on that sentence. She had always framed boundaries as abandonment, and she had always used fear as a social currency. I asked whether the claim included any workplace threats, any workplace contact, or any workplace disruption, and the answer was essentially no, even if they refused to say that word. I nodded once, then offered my own statement in a form they could not twist. I told them the divorce had been initiated because my spouse had used threats and manipulation to control me, and I had chosen a lawful civil response. I told them I had no intention of bringing personal conflict into the workplace, and I had never threatened anyone, anywhere. Then I told them I was requesting that any future communication about this matter be documented in writing, including the source of the concern, the exact wording, and the steps being taken. I did not accuse Lena. I did not dramatize. I just demanded the oxygen of facts. The meeting ended with the kind of vague closure designed to keep them flexible. They said they would follow up, and they suggested I consider counseling through the employee program, as if therapy were a bandage for someone else's smear campaign. I said I appreciated the resource, and I repeated that I expected written documentation going forward. When I stood up, the compliance person avoided my eyes, which told me they knew this was nonsense but liked their paycheck. Back at my desk, the rumor had already mutated. Rumors do not need accuracy, rumors only need momentum. My manager asked if I was okay with the forced politeness of someone trying to avoid liability. A coworker offered me a coffee I did not request, and another asked if I was holding up, as if my marriage were a public building that had collapsed. I thanked them, declined politely, and kept working, because diligence is the cleanest alibi in an office. At lunch, I stayed at my desk and ate quietly because I did not want to be seen looking angry, and I did not want to be seen looking sad. Either expression would become proof in someone else's story. My phone remained off, but the unknown number still lived in my mind like an insect under glass. I decided I needed to know whether that message was part of Lena's pressure campaign or just a random spark from her past. I would not reply, because replies are invitations. I would simply preserve what existed and increase clarity around it. When I got home that evening, Lena was waiting again, dressed down this time, as if she wanted to look like the injured party. Her eyes searched my face the way gamblers search the dealer's hands, and I could tell she already knew something about the HR meeting. She did not need access to my email. She only needed a coworker with a soft spine or a friend who thought they were helping. A workplace is a village made of glass, and every village has someone who talks. She asked how my day went, and her tone tried to sound casual, but casual is hard to fake when you are hungry for results. I told her it was productive, which was true, because I had learned the shape of her new strategy. She tried to prod for details, and when I did not give them, she pivoted into accusation, suggesting I was trying to make her look unstable. That was my favorite kind of projection because it arrived pre-packaged with irony. I did not argue with her. Instead, I opened the folder at the kitchen table and removed only one sheet of paper, the printed HR invite with the subject line. I placed it face down, not as a threat, but as a boundary. I told her that if she was involving my workplace, she needed to stop. The words were simple, but the meaning was sharp. She stared at the paper like it was radioactive. Then she laughed in that thin way she used when she wanted to look unbothered. She said she had no idea what I was talking about, and she said it too quickly, like a reflex. Then she made the mistake I was waiting for, the small slip that always happens when liars get comfortable. She referenced the exact time of the meeting, not the subject line, the time, which I had not mentioned. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but nothing is where patterns hide. I looked at her for a beat longer than normal, then I nodded as if I accepted it. I did not correct her. I did not challenge her. I simply stored it. After she went to bed, I turned my phone on and took two actions that required no hacking and no heroics. First, I saved a screenshot of the HR invite in my email showing the date, time, and subject line because it connected directly to her slip. Second, I opened my call log and took a screenshot of the unknown number's message timestamp alongside the missed calls from earlier days because sequence matters more than content. I placed both screenshots into a clear sleeve, wrote the date on the sleeve with a pen, and photographed the sleeve next to the kitchen clock. It was boring, and that was the point. Boring survives scrutiny. Then I did something else, something quiet and lawful that felt almost surgical. I created a one-page table on paper with columns for date, claim, source, and proof. I listed the smirk threat, the unknown number message, the HR meeting, and Lena's slip about the time. I did not write feelings. I wrote facts. This was my method now, the death by 1,000 truths, the slow collapse of a story built on vibes. The next day, the workplace pressure increased, because that is what happens when a rumor fails to kill quickly. People begin to feed it for entertainment. Someone posted a vague quote about believing survivors in a team chat, and nobody tagged me, but the timing was too clean to be accidental. Another coworker stopped inviting me to a project meeting I had always attended, then acted surprised when I asked about it. It was petty, and it was strategic, and it meant Lena's poison was spreading in ways that would not leave fingerprints. I did not lash out. I forwarded the meeting omission to myself, saved the timestamp, and wrote down the names of everyone on the invite list. I kept performing my job at a high level because competence is a stubborn form of resistance. By the time I left the office, I had an email from HR scheduling a second meeting, this time including a manager. They were escalating. That meant Lena was escalating too. At home, I found Lena in the living room scrolling her phone with the calmness of someone who believed she was winning. She looked up and asked if I was ready to be reasonable. The phrase sounded rehearsed, like a line she had practiced in front of her mirror. I told her I was being reasonable, and that was why everything was now documented. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty under the smugness, as if she could feel the ground changing beneath her. Then my phone buzzed again, and the screen lit up with another message from the same unknown number. It was longer this time, and it referenced the divorce directly, which meant it was not random anymore. I did not open it in front of Lena. I did not react. I simply turned the phone face down, because I already knew what the next step would be. I was going to find out who was speaking through that number, and I was going to do it without breaking a single rule, and without giving Lena the satisfaction of a private confrontation. The second HR meeting was scheduled for Friday morning, and I could already see the outline of her play forming, like a stage being built behind a curtain. What Lena did not understand was that I had stopped performing, and when you stop performing, the audience starts watching the liar instead. I did not sleep much that night, but I also did not chase sleep like a desperate man. I lay there and listened to the house breathe around me, because silence tells you who owns it. Lena's silence had always been a leash, and my first mistake was mistaking it for peace. My second mistake was thinking divorce papers would scare her into decency, because decent people do not need fear to behave. When she smirked and dared me to file, she was betting on my hesitation, not on my love. By dawn, the unknown number felt less like a mystery and more like a mechanism. It had arrived right when my boundaries started to hold, which meant it was designed to make them slip. Whoever was texting knew enough to mention the divorce, and they wanted me reactive, impulsive, and loud. People like Lena do not throw punches. They throw narratives, then wait for you to bruise yourself. I made coffee, ate something bland, and checked the locks out of habit, not paranoia. Control is not panic when it is consistent. At work, the air had changed again, as if someone turned the rumor dial slightly higher. My manager avoided being alone with me, which meant HR had whispered something that sounded like caution. A coworker asked if I was coming to a team lunch, and the question was so careful it felt like a test. I smiled, declined, and kept my voice steady, because tone is evidence to people who do not like paperwork. I opened my email and reread the HR follow-up request, noting the wording that tried to sound objective while suggesting I was a risk. I forwarded it to my private address, printed it, and stapled it behind yesterday's invite, because trails matter when stories start moving. At mid-morning, I took a bathroom break and turned my phone brightness down, like I was hiding contraband. I opened the message thread from the unknown number and read it slowly, like I was reading a contract. The new text did not threaten me directly, because direct threats create records. It framed itself like concern, like advice, like a friend trying to keep everyone safe. It suggested I was being watched, and it hinted that people were worried about my behavior. The message ended with a question that was not really a question, asking if I wanted this to get worse. It was designed to make my stomach move, to make me do something rash. I did not reply. I did not block it either, because blocking ends a pattern before it fully reveals itself. Instead, I took a screenshot of the message with the timestamp visible. Then I took a second screenshot showing the contact number at the top. I took a third screenshot of my call log to show I had not called it back. Then I put the phone away and washed my hands longer than necessary, because long pauses in public look normal. When you are being baited, normal is armor. At lunch, I left the building and sat in my car in the far corner of the lot. The dash cam faced forward, useless for my marriage, but useful for documenting my day. I started the engine, drove to a nearby coffee place, bought a coffee I did not want, and asked for a receipt. The cashier handed it over with a tired smile, and the receipt printed the time like it was proud of itself. I photographed the receipt next to today's date in my planner, because I wanted a clean anchor for where I was and when. If this situation turned into an accusation, I needed proof that my life still happened in real minutes. Back in the office, my phone buzzed again, and this time the unknown number called. The screen lit up with the same digits, ringing with that sterile insistence that makes your heart do something stupid. I let it ring out, because I did not want my voice in their pocket. When it went to voicemail, I waited a full minute and then checked the voicemail preview, because previews often show the length and time without playing audio. I took a screenshot of the call log showing the missed call time, then I saved a screenshot of the voicemail notification time. I did not listen to it yet, because listening would make it feel personal. I needed to treat it like a clue, not like a provocation. After work, I drove home with my radio off and my mind clean. Lena was in the kitchen when I arrived, moving around with performative calm. She asked how the day went, and her tone tried to be casual, but her eyes were counting. She wanted to know whether her pressure points were landing, and she wanted to know whether the workplace rumor had gotten under my skin. I gave her the only answer that starves a manipulator without starting a war. I told her my day was organized, then I changed the subject to something boring, because boring denies her the center of the stage. Later, when she went to shower, I sat at the table with my folder and turned the pages like a clerk. I laid out the HR invites, the screenshots, and the call log in a simple order. I wrote a single line under today's date. Unknown number escalated to voicemail. Then I wrote a second line. Workplace pressure increased. Manager avoidance noted. I did not write Lena's feelings, because that is where people hide. I wrote events, because events do not care who hates you. When the house finally settled, I listened to the voicemail with my headphones in, volume low. The voice was male, calm, and practiced, like someone used to being believed. He did not say his name, because names can be traced. He spoke in the same pseudo-concerned tone as the texts, suggesting he knew what kind of man I was, suggesting Lena was afraid, suggesting people were ready to take action if I did anything crazy. He said it like he was warning me, but the real point was clear. He was trying to frame me as dangerous before I could frame her as cruel. I listened twice, because the second time you hear the details you missed the first time. He had a faint background sound, a low hum, and once a metallic clink. It could have been anywhere, which meant it was not useful as location evidence. What was useful was his cadence, the way he repeated certain phrases like they were from a template. He said, "For everyone's safety," more than once, and he said, "You need to be reasonable," with the same rhythm Lena used earlier. That was not coincidence. That was coaching, or collaboration, or both. The next morning, I did something simple that felt almost too ordinary for a problem this dirty. I called the number from my work landline during office hours because office lines create logs that are harder to dispute. I did not speak when it answered because I did not want to offer my voice. I let it go to voicemail again and listened to the greeting. There was no name, only a generic recorded tone that sounded like an app-generated message. That confirmed what I already suspected. This was not some random ex reaching out with regret. This was a tool, a disposable megaphone built to sound legitimate. I did not need to know his childhood nickname. I needed to know his function in Lena's system. So I looked for the one place where systems leak: consistency. Lena still used her phone the way she always did, casually leaving it face up when she wanted me to see she was unbothered. That was part of her act. She wanted me to feel like I was chasing smoke while she lived her life. While she scrolled, I watched her lock screen light up with a preview notification from a messaging app. It disappeared quickly, but my eyes caught the shape of it, and that shape matched the unknown number's cadence. A short line, then a second line, like someone sending instructions. I did not grab her phone. I did not ask to see it. I did not do anything that would let her label me controlling. Instead, I waited until she left the room and her phone vibrated again on the counter. The screen lit up just long enough for a preview, and this time, I acted. I took a photo of the lock screen preview with my own phone, because the preview itself was evidence of contact without any hacking. The message was brief and telling, asking whether she had prepared the HR follow-up and whether she had kept her story consistent. It did not say his name, and it did not need to. It confirmed the existence of coordination. My pulse moved, but I kept my breathing flat, because this was the moment the story stopped being a bad divorce and started being a planned takedown. I backed away from the counter like I had never been there. When Lena returned, I kept my expression ordinary and asked her if she wanted tea, because normal is camouflage. She said no, and she watched me for a reaction that never arrived. That afternoon, I prepared for Friday's HR meeting like it was a hearing, not a conversation. I printed the screenshots in color because grayscale can be dismissed as unclear. I placed each one in a clear sleeve, wrote the date and time on each sleeve, and arranged them in a single binder with a one-page index. The index used plain language, HR invite, unknown number message, voicemail time, lock screen preview showing coordination. I did not label it evidence of harassment because labels trigger defensiveness. I labeled it documentation of external interference because that is what it was. On Thursday, the rumor at work reached the stage where people stop whispering and start watching. My manager asked me to swing by his office for a quick check-in, and his hands kept touching his coffee cup like it was a shield. He asked if everything was okay at home, and his eyes held that HR-suggested caution. I told him I appreciated the concern, and I said I was handling a civil divorce through proper channels. Then I told him something else, quietly, in the simplest form possible. I told him an outside party had been contacting me in a way that felt like intimidation, and I had documented it. I did not mention Lena by name. I did not ask him to take sides. I just planted the idea that I was the one with paper. His face changed slightly, not into belief, but into uncertainty, which is enough to slow a smear. He told me HR would address it, and I nodded as if that meant something. When I left his office, I saw two co-workers pause their conversation as I passed, then resume with forced smiles. That was fine. Let them watch. Watching makes people notice inconsistencies, and inconsistencies are where the truth hides. That evening, Lena was unusually sweet, which is always a bad sign. Sweetness from her was not affection, it was strategy. She offered to talk. She offered to reset. She offered to be adults, like she had never smirked and dared me to break my own heart. I listened, nodded, and said nothing binding, because words are signatures when someone is hunting them. Her sweetness turned sour fast, and she asked whether I planned to embarrass her in court, as if the court existed to soothe her ego. I told her I planned to be factual, and that was the only promise I gave. Later, as I was putting my binder into my bag, my phone buzzed again with a new message from the unknown number. The text was shorter now, blunt in the way people get when they sense their grip slipping. It said tomorrow would be bad for me if I did not cooperate, and it added a small detail that froze my hand for half a second. It referenced the exact room number for the HR meeting, which I had not shared with anyone outside the invite list. I stared at the screen until my eyes stopped trying to soften it. Lena was not just smearing me. She was feeding someone inside my workplace, or someone inside HR was feeding her. Either way, the line between my home and my job was already broken, and tomorrow's meeting was not going to be a discussion about safety. It was going to be a test of who controlled the record, and I was done letting other people write mine. By Friday morning, I stopped thinking of the HR meeting as an appointment and started treating it like a courtroom without a judge. The difference was simple and ugly. In court, rules are written down, and in HR, rules are whatever keeps the company quiet. I dressed the way I always dressed when I needed to look harmless. Plain shirt, clean shoes, no sharp edges. The binder sat in my bag like a weight that did not belong to me, because the truth never feels natural when someone has trained you to swallow it. Lena acted calm at breakfast, which meant she was not calm at all. She moved through the kitchen with the same confidence she used when she knew she had leverage. She asked if I wanted a ride, then smiled like she was joking, and I heard the trap inside the offer. If I rode with her, she could claim I followed her, controlled her, or escalated in the car. I declined without a reason and thanked her like she was a coworker holding a door. Her eyes narrowed for a second, and then she relaxed into that practiced softness that fooled people who never lived with her. Outside, the air was thin and cold, the kind of cold that makes every breath feel like a decision. I sat in my car for a minute, engine off, and reviewed my plan like a checklist. I was not there to plead, and I was not there to perform grief. I was there to create a record that survived gossip, survived spin, and survived whatever Lena and her unknown helper thought they were building. I took a photo of my watch next to the day's calendar page in my planner because timestamps are boring and unstoppable. Then I drove to the office. The building lobby felt different, not because anything changed physically, but because people were watching differently. The receptionist greeted me with the polite stiffness reserved for someone who might cause a scene. Two co-workers stood near the coffee station, and their conversation died the moment I walked past, as if my presence had become a liability. I nodded anyway, because nodding says I know what you are doing, and I do not fear it. In the elevator, I saw my reflection and felt a strange detachment, like I was watching someone else walk into a controlled burn. The HR meeting room sat at the end of a hall that always smelled faintly of cleaning solution and printer toner. The door was closed, but voices moved behind it, low and measured. I stopped outside, adjusted my bag strap, and let my breathing slow until my pulse stopped trying to announce itself. Then I opened the door and stepped into the kind of quiet that is never natural. Inside were three people: an HR representative I barely knew, a senior HR manager I had only seen at all-hands meetings, and my manager, seated slightly apart like he wanted distance from the decision. The HR manager smiled in a way that suggested sympathy, but her eyes stayed sharp, scanning me for volatility. On the table were two folders that were not mine, already positioned like they owned the space. I sat down, placed my bag beside my chair, and kept my hands visible on the table, because visible hands calm nervous bureaucrats. The HR manager began with safe language about concern, safety, and company policy. She referenced reports without citing sources, and she used phrases like, "We've been made aware," which always means someone is hiding behind the plural. The representative took notes, her pen moving steadily, while my manager stared at the table like he was waiting for this to end. I listened without interrupting, because the first 5 minutes of any accusation are about building momentum, and momentum is easiest to break with patience. When the HR manager finally asked if I understood the seriousness of the situation, I nodded and asked one direct question, carefully and calmly. I asked whether the reports included any documented incident on company property involving me and my spouse, or whether the reports were based on outside communication. The HR manager's smile tightened, and she gave a vague answer about patterns and concerns. I asked again, slower, using fewer words because evidence does not like adjectives. She admitted gently that the concern stemmed from messages and calls sent to relevant parties. That was the opening, and I did not rush through it like an excited man. I reached into my bag and pulled out my binder, placing it on the table with the slow care of someone handling fragile glass. The HR representative paused her writing for the first time, and the senior manager's eyes flicked to the binder as if it offended her. I did not label it dramatically. I told them I had documented outside interference that appeared designed to frame me as a threat during divorce proceedings, and I wanted it in the record of this meeting. The HR manager hesitated and said they could not accept personal materials without review, which was their way of saying they did not want responsibility. I told her I understood, and I asked that the meeting notes include a single sentence. I offered documentation of external intimidation tied to the divorce, and HR declined to accept it at this time. The HR representative's pen moved again, and I watched her write, because that line mattered more than any facial expression. If they refused evidence, I wanted the refusal logged. Then I opened the binder and slid one page across the table. Not a confession, not a speech, just a printed screenshot with the unknown number's message and timestamp. I did not ask them to feel anything about it. I asked them to read it, and I kept my voice neutral and low. The HR manager read it quickly, then looked up as if to gauge whether I was enjoying myself. I was not. I was documenting. I handed over a second page showing the missed call log and the voicemail notification time. I handed over a third page showing the message that referenced the exact meeting room number. The HR manager's eyes narrowed, and she looked toward the HR representative, who looked toward my manager, who finally lifted his head. That room number detail shifted something in the air because it suggested leakage inside the process, and companies hate the smell of internal failure. The HR manager asked how the sender could know the room number, and her tone had changed from protective to irritated. I told her I did not know, and I did not need to speculate. I told her only that the sender knew details they should not know, and the sender used those details to threaten a bad day if I did not cooperate. She asked what I meant by cooperate, and I told her exactly what was written. I did not dress it up, and I did not accuse anyone in the room. I said the sender's language mirrored my spouse's language, and I had reason to believe the communications were coordinated. The HR manager asked if I was claiming my spouse was harassing me, and I said I was not claiming anything without proof, which is why I had proof. Then I asked calmly whether HR had communicated with my spouse directly. The HR manager said they could not discuss that, which usually means yes. A small part of me wanted to laugh because secrecy is always the first refuge of people who call themselves compliance. Instead, I nodded and told them I was also willing to provide a lock screen preview photo showing a message about keeping the story consistent and preparing HR follow-up, which appeared on my spouse's phone in my home. The HR manager's posture stiffened, and she said she would need to consult with legal before discussing any of that. I told her that was fine, and I asked that the meeting notes include that I offered additional documentation of coordination and would provide it through the appropriate channel. The HR manager tried to steer back into her original script about safety plans and workplace boundaries. She asked whether I had ever raised my voice at home, whether I had ever blocked Lena's exit during an argument, whether I had ever threatened her finances. The questions were designed to build a picture without requiring facts. I answered each one with short, clear denials and refused to embellish. When she asked whether I had any reason to believe Lena felt unsafe, I said she had threatened divorce as a tactic, smirked when she did it, and seemed more interested in control than safety. I said that was my personal observation, not a diagnosis, and I was here to address workplace interference. The HR manager stared at me for a beat, like she was deciding which part of me she could label. She did not like that I sounded composed. Composed men ruin stories that rely on chaos. She asked if I was willing to sign a statement agreeing to a behavior plan. I asked to see the statement first, and the senior manager slid a page across the table. It was a standard agreement full of vague language, and it included a section about acknowledging concerns raised by third parties. That line was poison because it turned rumors into concerns I had supposedly validated. I told her I would not sign anything that validated unverified third-party claims. I offered to sign a determined set of boundaries specific to work, like avoiding any contact with Lena on company property, notifying security if she appeared, and communicating with HR only in writing. I offered that because it was reasonable and because it made me look like the adult, not the accused. The HR manager disliked that, but she could not easily refuse it, because refusing reasonable boundaries makes HR look reckless. She told me they would review my proposal and follow up. When the meeting ended, the HR representative asked me to email copies of my documentation to a secure address. The senior manager frowned at her, but the representative had already spoken, and words cannot be unsaid. I nodded and told them I would send the documents and request confirmation of receipt. Then I stood, thanked them politely, and walked out without looking back, because leaving calmly is its own evidence. In the hallway, my phone buzzed again, and my stomach tightened in that involuntary way it does when your life becomes a theater. The unknown number had sent a new message already, fast enough to feel like surveillance. It was short, smug, and cruel in a way that made my hands go cold. It said they knew I brought a binder, and it said the binder would not save me when the real file surfaced. Then it added one more line that felt like a blade pressed gently against skin. They said Lena had already told a version of me that would stick. I stopped walking and stared at the screen until the words stayed put. The timing proved the point I had been building. Someone on the inside was feeding information out, and Lena's game was bigger than just an ex-boyfriend and a smug dare. I put the phone away and kept moving, because freezing in public looks like guilt to people who want guilt. But inside my head, something quiet and hard clicked into place. If there was a real file coming, it meant Lena was planning a late-stage narrative strike, and I needed to find it before it found me. When I reached the lobby, my manager caught up with me near the elevators. He looked nervous and older, like he had realized he was standing between a person and a machine. He said he did not know about the room number leak, and his voice sounded like he wanted me to believe him. I told him I was not blaming him, and I asked one careful question. I asked whether anyone in the department had spoken to Lena or her ex, directly or indirectly, about my behavior. His eyes shifted, and he said he would check, which is what people say when the answer is yes, but messy. Outside, I sat in my car and let the engine idle while I organized my thoughts into clean lines. I had proof of intimidation, proof of coordination, and proof of internal leakage. What I did not have was the real file, the narrative weapon Lena planned to drop when she needed to win. I looked at my phone again, opened the unknown thread, and took another screenshot of the latest message with the timestamp visible. Then I opened my email app and drafted a message to HR requesting written confirmation of receipt, and I attached the documents without drama. I sent it, and I waited for the sent confirmation to appear. As I drove home, my mind replayed Lena's smirk from weeks ago, the casual cruelty of her dare. The smirk was not confidence in love, or in truth, or in her own innocence. It was confidence that she could invent a story faster than I could document reality. She had built her life around that advantage, and now she had finally met a man willing to move slower and write everything down. When I pulled into the driveway, my phone lit up again, but this time it was not the unknown number. It was a notification from a shared account, a merchant alert on a charge I did not recognize, and the vendor name hit my eyes like a spotlight. It was a local service tied to legal paperwork, and the charge was small, the kind of small that tries to look harmless. The timestamp was within the last hour, during my HR meeting, which meant Lena had been busy while I was being questioned. I stared at the alert and felt the first real clue of the real file rising out of the noise, because people who build narratives always need documents to make them look official. I saved a screenshot of the alert, tightened my grip on the steering wheel, and realized the next part of this was not going to be about defending myself anymore. It was going to be about finding what Lena filed, who she filed it with, and what she planned to call me when she thought the paperwork made it true. The merchant alert sat on my screen like a small, polite bomb, because it did not scream, and it did not need to. I recognized the vendor name the way you recognize a smell you hate, because the letters carried a promise of paperwork, process, and official-looking harm. Lena never played games without props, and legal props were her favorite, because people bow to paper before they bow to truth. I parked, walked inside, and closed the door gently, because slamming doors is what a villain does. The house felt staged in that quiet way it always did lately, like the furniture was waiting for instructions. I put my keys down in the same bowl as always, washed my hands, and then opened the shared account portal from my own laptop, because the account was in my name, and that mattered. The charge description was trimmed, but not trimmed enough to hide what it was, and the timestamp lined up with the hour I was sitting under HR's fluorescent lights. I did not call Lena, because calling her would turn a clue into an argument, and arguments are where she harvested mistakes. Instead, I took screenshots, saved them into a folder with today's date, and wrote a single line in my evidence ledger on paper, because paper never updates itself when someone needs it to vanish. Then I called the bank and asked for a transaction summary printout, because the bank does not care about drama, and drama cannot negotiate with a teller. The person on the phone confirmed the merchant category, confirmed the amount, and confirmed that the transaction had been entered as a service fee, not a purchase, which meant filing or delivery. When I got off the phone, I stared at the wall for a full minute, because I could feel the shape of the story Lena was building. She wanted an official label attached to me before I could attach one to her, because labels move faster than facts. She wanted HR to treat me like risk, and she wanted a court clerk to treat her like a victim, because those two assumptions feed each other. It was not about fear, and it was not about love, and it was not even about the ex, not really. It was about control, and control always needs an audience. The front door opened quietly, and I did not need to look up to know it was her, because she entered the house like someone returning to a job she still believed she owned. Lena moved through the hallway and into the kitchen, and she paused when she saw me at the table, because she could smell a shift in balance. She asked how my day went, and her tone was too smooth, which meant she had already rehearsed her concern. I answered with a simple, careful sentence about the HR meeting being documented, and I watched her face for the smallest glitch. She tried to hide it, but her eyes flicked down to my laptop, then back up to me, and her mouth tightened for half a second. That was enough. She asked whether HR said anything, and she added the word casually, like she was not starving for the details. I told her they asked questions, and I answered them, and I offered documentation of the intimidation I received. I did not mention the merchant alert, because you do not show your opponent the last card unless you are ready to end the hand. Lena leaned against the counter like she was bored, but her body was too still, like she was bracing. She said she hoped I was not making things worse, and she said it the way people say they hope you do not hurt yourself, which is to say, with blame disguised as care. I told her I was making things clear, and I watched that smirk try to climb onto her face, then fail halfway. She asked if I was still serious about the divorce, and I told her I was already serious enough to file, which meant her dare was now a document too. For a moment, the kitchen felt like a courtroom where the judge had not arrived yet, and Lena did not like waiting for authority. She asked whether I was trying to punish her for talking to her ex, and I told her I was not punishing her for talking, because talk is cheap. I told her I was ending a marriage with someone who treated silence like a weapon and obedience like a lesson. Her eyes sharpened at the word lesson, because she remembered the first time she said it to me with that satisfied smirk. Lena laughed softly and said I was being dramatic, which was her old move, because if she could label me dramatic, she could pretend she was the adult. Then she said something that was supposed to sound like a warning but landed like a confession. She said she had options if I insisted on making this ugly, and she said she did not want to involve anyone, which was the same as saying she already had. I nodded like I accepted the information as neutral, because the more you react, the more she believes her pressure works. That night, I did not sleep much, because the mind refuses rest when it suspects incoming paperwork. I woke before dawn and checked the mailbox in my robe like a man waiting for a verdict, and there it was, a certified mail slip, folded neatly into the metal box. The return address was a local process service office, and the recipient line included my workplace address, not my home. Lena had sent something to my job on purpose because she wanted the delivery itself to become part of the rumor. I took a photo of the slip with the date visible, then drove to the post office the moment it opened, because time is the one resource you can lose without noticing. The clerk asked for my ID, then handed me an envelope with a red stripe and a weight that felt heavier than paper should. I did not open it in the car like a desperate man in a movie, because desperation makes you sloppy. I drove to a quiet parking lot, sat still, and opened it slowly. Inside was a notice of a temporary protective order request, filed under the kind of language that turns air into evidence. It accused me of intimidation, control, and threatening behavior, and it referenced workplace escalation without any details that could be checked. It cited the HR meeting as an example of my unpredictable response, which told me exactly how Lena's external story and internal story were being stitched together. The hearing date was set within 10 days, and the instructions were simple and cruel. Show up and defend yourself, or become the story by default. I read it twice, because you always read a lie twice, once to understand it and once to see where it breaks. The details were vague, which was the first crack, because vague stories survive only until someone asks for one specific time. The second crack was the timeline, because she claimed fear during days when she had been smug, relaxed, and bold enough to dare me into divorce. The third crack was the mention of her ex as a supportive friend, because she did not name him, and people only avoid names when names can be checked. I took photos of every page, then placed the packet back into the envelope, because I wanted it preserved exactly as delivered. Then I called my attorney, a calm woman named Nadia Rowe, whose voice sounded like a clean desk and a locked drawer. Nadia listened without interrupting, then told me not to contact Lena directly, not to post anything, and not to treat this like a personal fight. She told me to treat it like a record-building exercise, because in civil court, credibility is a currency you can either protect or spend. By noon, Nadia had pulled the public docket entry for Lena's filing, and the docket itself was blunt and boring, which made it powerful. The entry included the filing time, the case number, and the requested relief, and it confirmed what I already suspected. Lena was not trying to stay safe, and she was trying to stay in control of the narrative while the divorce moved forward. Nadia told me we would respond formally, we would request the supporting evidence, and we would bring our own documentation to the hearing in a clean, simple order. The problem was not that Lena filed, because filing is allowed even when you are lying. The problem was that she had timed it to my HR meeting, and that meant she wanted my job to become leverage in the divorce. Nadia asked whether I had proof that Lena coordinated intimidation around the HR meeting, and I told her I had messages from an unknown number that referenced the meeting room. Nadia went quiet for a beat, then asked me to forward everything, and her tone changed from calm to focused. In the afternoon, I went back to the bank and asked for the transaction summary in writing, because I wanted a paper trail that did not depend on a phone call memory. The teller printed the summary and pointed to the merchant descriptor, which included a short code that matched the process service office on the envelope. I thanked her, took the paper, and photographed it beside my watch and today's newspaper at home, because boring proof stacks up like bricks. Then I added it to the binder, placed it into a clear sleeve, and labeled it with date and time. By evening, I had a timeline on my table that looked like the skeleton of Lena's plan. She dared me to divorce, she escalated with HR pressure, she coordinated intimidation to push me into a reaction, and she filed for a protective order the moment she sensed the record turning against her. She wanted me to explode, because an explosion would make her claims feel true. My problem for her was that I did not explode, because I had learned her lesson in a different way than she expected. The late twist arrived without drama, which is how the worst parts always arrive. Nadia called me after dinner and told me she spoke to a clerk who had seen a similar pattern recently, where filings were paired with workplace complaints to create reinforcement. Nadia said she could not prove who coached Lena, but she said one clue stood out. The filing paperwork listed a third-party contact number for safety coordination, and the number belonged to a private security company that serviced my office building, not Lena's neighborhood. That detail turned my stomach colder than any insult Lena had ever thrown at me. It meant the intimidation was not just personal, and it was operational. Someone with access to building routines, meeting rooms, and internal schedules had been feeding her the kind of details that make a lie feel real. It also meant the ex was not just an ex who wanted attention, because attention does not come with service contracts and access lanes. Lena had not just kept talking to her ex, she had let him into the machinery around me. I drove to my office after hours and sat across the street, watching the lobby lights through the glass, because I did not need to enter to think clearly. I remembered a man I had seen near reception twice this week, a clean suit, a cheap smile, and a posture that suggested he belonged. I remembered him chatting with the receptionist like he knew her, and I remembered Lena's confidence whenever she mentioned options. The picture sharpened in my mind until it stopped being a guess and started being a likely explanation. I went home, opened my binder, and added one more page to the front, a one-page timeline with dates, places, and payments, no commentary, no emotion, just sequence. I labeled it, "For the record," because that was the only language that mattered now. Then I checked my calendar and saw the hearing date, the HR follow-up date, and the company town hall that HR had quietly scheduled for policy reminders, all clustered within the same week. Lena thought she had built a cage around me using fear and paperwork, but what she had actually built was a stage with bright lights and too many witnesses. And the moment I realized the final confrontation could happen in public, inside the same system she tried to weaponize, I felt something settle into place like a lock turning. I closed the binder, set it by the door, and understood exactly what my next move had to be, because the last lesson was not about love or loyalty anymore. It was about timing, and I had finally found the one day Lena could not talk her way out of. The morning of the town hall, I shaved slower than usual and kept my eyes on my own hands, because a man who wants control starts by controlling his smallest movements. The building looked the same from the street, all glass and clean lines, but I could already feel the difference inside, because today the air belonged to records, policy, and witness memory. I carried my binder in a plain canvas tote, not because it was dramatic, but because plain things travel farther without attracting attention. Nadia met me at the cafe across the street, and she did not waste time on reassurance, because reassurance is for people who are still guessing. She slid a single page toward me, a printout of the updated docket entry, and the line that mattered was the same line that always matters in these games: hearing scheduled, response filed, evidence requested. She told me the protective order request was weak on specifics, and weakness is not failure, but it is an opening, and openings are where careful men win. Then she reminded me that today was not a courtroom, even if it would feel like one, because today was a workplace with microphones and a compliance mood. I walked in through the lobby, and the receptionist gave me a quick smile that did not reach her eyes, because rumors had already moved through the building like spilled coffee. The security desk was staffed by the same private contractor, and I saw him again, the clean suit, the too easy posture, and the confidence of a man who believes he is untouchable. He glanced at my tote and then at my face, and his expression tried to become friendly, but it could not fully commit, because friendly men do not study your hands. I signed in the normal way, used my badge like always, and gave him nothing to read, except that I was calm. The town hall was set in the large conference room, the one with the stage lights and the projector that made every face look guilty. HR had framed it as a policy reminder and a culture reset, which meant someone higher up had smelled smoke and wanted to see where it came from. People filed in with their laptops and their careful expressions, and I watched the social geometry form in real time, because betrayal always reorganizes a room. Lena sat 3 rows ahead, angled slightly toward the aisle, and her posture was relaxed in the way of someone who expects the system to protect her. Her ex sat near the back, close to the exit, which told me he planned for escapes, not for truth. He wore a visitor badge on a lanyard, and the badge was the wrong color for this event, which meant someone had pulled strings, or someone had stopped checking. He looked around like a man enjoying his own influence, and his eyes landed on Lena with a small, approving nod, like a handler rewarding a trainee. I did not stare at either of them, because staring gives the other person control of your attention, and I was here to control the record. The HR director stepped up and started the usual talk about standards, respect, and reporting channels, and the words floated over the room like wallpaper. I listened anyway, because the key lines are always hidden inside the boring ones, and today the key line arrived with the casual certainty of policy. She said that external vendors and contracted security were held to the same conduct rules, and she said that conflicts of interest must be disclosed, and she said that misuse of access would be treated as a serious violation. The ex shifted in his chair when she said access, and he tried to correct his posture too late, because the body always answers truth faster than the mouth. When the HR director opened the floor for questions, the room hesitated in that familiar corporate way, because most people would rather suffer quietly than speak publicly. I stood up before doubt could become a habit, and I kept my voice low, because the lower your voice, the more people lean in. I said I had a question about the reporting process when vendor personnel were involved, and I said I had documented evidence that needed to be entered into the record. The HR director's face changed subtly because she expected vague complaints, not documents, and she asked me to meet her at the side table near the projector. I walked down the aisle with my tote in one hand, and I could feel Lena watching my back because she recognized the tempo of a man who had stopped negotiating. At the side table, I placed a single clear sleeve down, not the whole binder, because you never dump everything at once. Inside the sleeve was the one-page timeline, dates, places, payments, and the matching process service charge that tied Lena's filing to an external operational support line. Nadia stood 2 steps behind me, silent and steady, because a lawyer's presence changes the room without changing the script. The HR director glanced at the sleeve and then looked up at me, and her eyes were sharper now, because she understood this was not gossip. She asked if I was requesting to file a formal complaint, and I said yes, and I said I wanted the complaint ID entered now, with witnesses present, because I had already watched how stories mutate in private. The HR director turned to the board secretary seated near the front and asked her to open a case intake on the spot, and the secretary's fingers moved fast on the keyboard because there is nothing like public observation to speed up bureaucracy. The ex stood up in the back, and he tried to speak over the room by laughing, because laughter is a cheap smokescreen. The HR director raised her hand and asked him to identify himself, and he gave his name, and then he tried to explain he was there as a guest, and that his presence had nothing to do with anything. The room's attention snapped to him, because people love a distraction more than a policy lecture, and now he was the distraction. I did not correct him or accuse him, because accusations are slippery, and I was here for traction. I asked one question only, and I kept it simple enough for the whole room to carry. I asked him to state the date and time he was on site last Thursday evening, the same evening Lena told me she was at therapy, and the same evening my HR meeting notes showed I left the building early. He started to answer quickly, then hesitated, and then looked toward Lena, because men who lie often look for coaching. Lena's face tightened, and she shook her head once, almost invisible. But it was there, and a dozen people saw it because the room had become a spotlight. The HR director asked the security desk supervisor to pull up the visitor log for that day, not from a secret system, but from the printed sign-in sheets they keep at the desk, because corporate life runs on paper when it wants to be believed. The supervisor returned with a clipboard and a single sheet in a plastic cover, and he handed it to the HR director without ceremony. She read the relevant line out loud, and the line contained the ex's name, the time, and the reason for visit, and the reason was written as meeting support, which is a phrase that means nothing and therefore means everything. Lena stood up fast, and her chair scraped, because the sound of furniture is often the first honest thing a person produces. She tried to speak, but the HR director held up the clear sleeve and asked her to confirm whether the process service charge came from the shared account and whether the filing had been submitted using a vendor contact number associated with our building security contractor. Lena's mouth opened and closed, and then she tried to shift the frame by saying the divorce was personal and that none of this belonged here. The HR director answered calmly that access misuse and intimidation linked to workplace processes did belong here, and her calm was colder than anger. The ex stepped toward the aisle like he wanted to exit, and a security officer moved into his path, not aggressively, just firmly, because policy enforcement does not need theatrics. The HR director said the complaint ID had been created and logged, and the board secretary read the number out loud, because numbers are a kind of public gravity. She said the vendor badge would be revoked pending review, and she said the individual would be escorted out to prevent further disruption, and she said it like it was standard procedure, because for her, it was. Lena's confidence broke in a way that surprised even her, because when control leaves, it leaves fast. Her eyes filled, and her breathing turned shallow, and she whispered my name like she was trying to pull me back into the old private arena. She said she did not think I would do this, and her voice cracked on the word think, because she had mistaken my restraint for weakness. I looked at her once, not with anger, not with pity, but with the flat clarity of a man who has already filed the papers and already decided the future. I told the HR director I would provide the full binder through counsel, and I told her I was requesting a formal written confirmation of receipt today because my life had been shaped by missing confirmations lately. The HR director nodded, and the board secretary stamped the sleeve receipt line with a red received mark, and she held it up long enough for me to photograph it with the time visible on the room clock. The room stayed silent because silence, in the right place, is not punishment. It is a verdict. As security guided the ex toward the exit, he tried to look back at Lena, but she did not look at him, because in that moment she understood he could not save her from the record. She turned toward me instead, and tears ran down her face, and her shoulders shook, and the sobbing arrived like a delayed reaction to a dare that finally landed. I did not move toward her, because moving toward her would turn this back into a relationship, and I was done living inside her games. I picked up my tote, nodded once to Nadia, and walked out of the conference room while the HR director announced a short recess pending verification, because the system always buys time when it needs to clean up a mess. The hallway lights were harsh, and the carpet muffled my steps, and for the first time in weeks, the building felt quiet in a truthful way. Behind me, the town hall room stayed full of witnesses, full of stamped paper, and full of a story Lena could not smirk away anymore, and I left it all there, exactly where it belonged.